Computer recording. Okay, cool. Let's get this party started, y'all.
Yay.
And today we are going through some of the most exciting parts of the book of Exodus. We're going to be looking at the plagues, and I have in the notes that I'll post. I have a link to an article or a post of some sort. It's from rice.edu. So it has a level of credibility, and so I hope it is credible. And I was trying to see if this was a good resource, kind of evaluating it. But it is a list of the different plagues and the Egyptian god that it is kind of a counter to. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through. But that, if you're curious, that link will have more info than I'm going to be able to go into tonight. So as we are jumping into chapter 7, verse 8 through 10, verse 29. So we got a lot of ground to cover. Some of the plagues have a lot more explaining text, and some are very brief. But all throughout the call of Moses, the Lord had told him that he was going to send these plagues, that he was going to display his power, and that he was going to harden Pharaoh's heart. And so we're going to see in the plagues even tonight some language of the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and also Pharaoh hardened his heart. And so that little interchange that we talked a little bit about last week is going to be on display. And so when Moses went back to Egypt, he displayed the ability to turn water into blood to the Israelites, like as saying, like, look at the power that God has here. And they were like, wow, you really do. He also then confronted Pharaoh, and it did not go well. Pharaoh said, no, I'm not going to do this. And so then the work actually got harder for the people of Israel when Pharaoh said, I'm not going to provide you with straw to make the bricks. And so you're going to have to find that straw on your own, but your quota is going to have to remain the same. And so even as Moses is getting started on his liberation mission, it is not going great so far. One of the things that is interesting is, the Lord kind of gave Moses an overview of what he was going to do in liberating the people of Israel, but he didn't give him the specifics. Like, he did not actually say to Moses how many plagues there were going to be. And so as he has these interactions with Pharaoh, there are times where Pharaoh seems to concede a little bit about letting the people go and worship the Lord. And, could have been one of those times where Moses was like, great, this is good. And then taken away. One of the principles that I think is interesting in Moses' story and interactions with Pharaoh, and even in our own lives today, is when we are on path as we're serving the Lord and we have a general idea of what God wants to do in us and through us, but then we have those moments where it seems like that plan is revoked or disrupted, and how we handle that, and how can we continue to remain faithful to the mission that God has given to us, even when it seems like everything is topsy-turvy. And so I think that's one of the things that is interesting about this passage. Moses continues to do the things that God calls him to do. And as we are looking at the plagues tonight, they are, as I said briefly, there's 11 signs that we see. So like we talk about 10 plagues, but there's really 11 signs that are happening in in this account. And we're going to look at the first 10 signs, and then we're going to look at the last plague, the death of the firstborn. We're going to look at that next week. And so we're going to get all the way up to that and then pause. But all of these are in some way or another confronting or humiliating the Egyptians and their deities, and proving that Yahweh has power over all of them. And so that's one of the interesting little details as we look through this, that God is not just randomly doing these things. The other thing as we look at this is that you can see a progression in the plagues that would potentially lead to a naturalistic understanding of what's going on. So like the flies and the gnats and the flies are appearing after there's all the dead frogs, and then the livestock die, and it's probably, people think it was from anthrax, and then throw the ashes up in the air, and that could have been from the animals that were burned there after they died, and that could have spread anthrax. Like, so there's these like progressions that happen, and we'll kind of get to all of these things, but the key point in the Exodus narrative is not necessarily these could all have a naturalistic explanation for why they happened. The point is that they happened when God said they would happen. They're on command. And so even if the Lord was using these naturalistic means, like, he rules over creation, and so he has every right and the authority to dictate the locusts, the gnats, the flies. He can do that. And so the plagues are demonstrating to us his power over creation in all things. And so let's just jump in and get to this in 7 verse 8. It starts by saying this: the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, when Pharaoh says to you, perform a miracle, then say to Aaron, take your staff and throw it down before Pharaoh, and it will become a snake. So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and did just as the Lord commanded. Aaron threw his staff down in front of Pharaoh and his officials, and it became a snake. Pharaoh then summoned wise men and sorcerers, and the Egyptian magicians also did the same thing by their secret arts. Each one threw down his staff, and it became a snake. But Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. Yet Pharaoh's heart became hard. He would not listen to them, just as the Lord had said. So this first sign is just an attempt to display to the people in Pharaoh's court God's power. And the first thing that he is going after is the symbol of the the symbol of Pharaoh's authority. And when we last week looked at Moses and the staff that he had, like, the staff is serving as a sign of God's authority, God's power working through Moses and Aaron. And so turning the staff, Aaron's staff this time, into a serpent is a confrontation with Pharaoh directly. Like, you are, because the Pharaoh's, you may have in your mind like a picture of the like a sarcophagus with like the Pharaoh mask and the head dress, and there's a little cobra right there. And so this could be what is going on here, is that here is a sign of Pharaoh's like power and kingdom. Like, here's a serpent, a cobra even, but the magicians, they're able to do something similar. And so they make these snakes happen through their dark arts. So there's some kind of conjuring that they're doing, and we don't know exactly what they're doing. There are people who, in reading, that there is an ability to like freeze a cobra, like paralyze it. And so were these magicians holding paralyzed cobras and then like at just the right time, like throwing it down? I don't know. It seems kind of far-fetched. There's some kind of dark spiritual activity happening where they turn their staffs into serpents as well. And then the Aaron's staff serpent eats all of the other ones. And then, we also kind of wonder, like, what happened to Aaron's staff after that? Did he then pick it up? And here's one of my weird questions is if this Aaron's serpent staff ate all the other serpents, is Aaron's serpent staff heavier now than it was before? I don't know. That's one of my questions that I had when I was reading this. But the other interesting thing in this is that the serpent itself, it could actually be translated as like a baby crocodile. So we look at like snakes, or like, so it could have been like a reptile, not necessarily a snake. So there's some different questions on what is happening here. But the point for why this is significant is that Aaron's staff defeated their staffs. Aaron's staff ate up all the other magician staff, and so this is the distinction between Aaron and them. And he is, the Lord is displaying his power, but Pharaoh is, doing exactly what the Lord said Pharaoh would do. He's still hardening his heart. Pharaoh's heart became hard, and he would not listen to them, just as the Lord had said. And so that's the first sign. And here's a confrontation between the Lord, Yahweh, and Pharaoh's court. Pharaoh is still rejecting. The next sign, and this is a little bit longer, is verse 14. Then the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is unyielding. He refuses to let my people go. Go to Pharaoh in the morning as he goes out to the river. Confront him on the bank of the Nile, and take in your hand the staff that was changed into a snake. Then say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has sent me to say to you, let my people go, so that they may worship me in the wilderness. But until now you have not listened. This is what the Lord says. By this you will know that I am the Lord. With the staff that is in my hand, I will strike the water of the Nile, and it will be changed into blood. The fish in the Nile will die, and the river will stink. The Egyptians will not be able to drink its water. The Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron, take your staff and stretch out your hand over the waters of Egypt, over the streams and canals, over the ponds and all the reservoirs, and they will turn to blood. Blood will be everywhere in Egypt, even in vessels of wood and stone. Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord had commanded. He raised his staff in the presence of Pharaoh and his officials and struck the water of the Nile, and all the water was changed into blood. The fish in the Nile died, and the river smelled so bad that the Egyptians could not drink its water. Blood was everywhere in Egypt. But the Egyptian magicians did the same things by their secret arts. And Pharaoh's heart became hard. He would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said. Instead, he turned and went into his palace and did not take even this to heart. And all the Egyptians dug along the Nile to get drinking water, because they could not drink the water of the river. 7 days passed after the Lord struck the Nile. All right, so the Nile River was the source of life for the people of Egypt. And so for it to turn into blood, and for the fish to die and the water to be undrinkable, that is a very intense confrontation. It is it's a clear sign that something is wrong. And there are some naturalistic explanations for what could happen. Did it turn into actual blood, or did it just turn to blood color? And there is some possibility in the Hebrew the original language, that it could just be red blood color. And that could have been from the headwaters of the Nile. They are in Ethiopia, and there is a process by which the waters become very rust colored, and like a lot of minerals will get washed in from time to time from high storms upriver, and so that could be what happens here, where the water is just undrinkable and deadly to all the life that's in there, and that'll affect the entire region. The entire life of Egypt is now in jeopardy, because they don't know how long this is going to take. They don't know how long this is going to last. And as they're seeing all the fish die in the river, could be a panic moment for like a normal person. And here the confrontation with the Egyptian god Hapi is the water bearer, and so that's the first in your face confrontation with the divinity or the idols of Egypt. And what's interesting in this plague here is the magicians, they are able to find water that is not blood colored and turn it into blood or blood colored water as well through their secret arts. Now, that's not super helpful in this situation, because like the magicians, what would have been helpful is if for Pharaoh is if he would have been able to get his magicians to turn it back into water that they could drink. But they are not able to do that. And so they are, so they are suffering here for 7 days. One of the challenges for us as we look at this sometimes is like, well, most of the people in Egypt weren't doing anything to deserve this kind of judgment. But we do see that the people were able to dig down along the banks of the river and find water that could be safely consumed. One of the interesting things, like water filtration through sand, is actually something that people still do now. Like if you build a water filter system for like a village in Mexico, they'll get you a big 50-gallon barrel, like a plastic barrel, and there will be different levels of sand in different coarseness through the barrel that you put the water in top, and it filters through all the sand, and then it's drinkable water by the time it gets to the bottom. And so the people in Egypt are able to get the water that they need to survive for themselves, even though the river itself is dying, basically, and things are dying in it. And so this one here we see takes 7 days to filter out. So somewhere upriver, the blood started, and then it's 7 days to get all the way through the river out to sea. And so as we have this confrontation, Pharaoh again is like, no way, I'm not letting them out. He doesn't even consider it, and they just keep on going. The next plague also comes from the water. Before I get to that, there's an interesting thing that's happening in these plagues too. The first plague is water turning to blood. The last plague, the people of Israel are protected by the blood of the lamb over their doorpost. And so I'm not sure if there's anything necessarily of significance there, but when we see blood mentioned in scripture, maybe that's one of the things that we should note to see if there are things that are happening here that we should pay attention to, because life is in the blood. All the way back to Noah, they were told to not drink the blood of the animals after the flood subsided. They could eat the meat, but they could not drink the blood. And so here we see that, this life is in the blood kind of motif is kind of coming back around in the Exodus. So, all right, chapter 8, verse 1, the plague of frogs, which sounds, if I had to choose, this would probably be my least favorite because frogs are loud too. Verse 1, then the Lord said to Moses, go to Pharaoh and say to him, this is what the Lord says, let my people go so that they may worship me. If you refuse to let them go, I will send a plague of frogs on your whole country. The Nile will teem with frogs. They will come up into your palace and your bedroom and onto your bed and into your houses of your officials and on your people and into your ovens and kneading troughs. The frogs will come up on you and your people and all your officials. Then the Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron, stretch out your hand with your staff over the streams and canals and ponds and make frogs come up on the land of Egypt. And so one of the things to note here, go to Pharaoh and say this is what's going to happen. Pharaoh doesn't even get a chance to change his mind in this situation. It's like, this is just happening. It's not whether or not you're going to let my people go. It is going to happen. And they're going to be everywhere. And I remember when I was in probably 5th grade, there was a whole new round of like animated Bible story movies, and this imagery of frogs in ovens like really stuck with me. And they animated it, and like a person opened a door for an oven, and a bunch of frogs jumped out. Um, it's a lot of frogs. Let's keep going. So Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land. But the magicians did the same things by their secret arts. They also made frogs come up on the land of Egypt. Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "Pray to the Lord to take the frogs away from me and my people, and I will let your people go to offer sacrifices to the Lord." Again, the magicians are able to replicate something, but they can't make the frogs go away. They can't solve the problem. They can just mimic the problem. Moses said to Pharaoh, I leave to you the honor of setting the time for me to pray for you and your officials and your people, that you and your houses may be rid. I'm sorry. No, sorry. I thought I skipped a page. That you and your houses may be rid of the frogs, except for those that remain in the Nile. Tomorrow, Pharaoh said. Moses replied, "It will be as you say, so that you may know that there is no one like the Lord our God. The frogs will leave you and your houses, your officials, and your people. They will remain only in the Nile." After Moses and Aaron left Pharaoh, Moses cried out to the Lord about the frogs, and he had brought on Pharaoh. And the Lord did what Moses asked. The frogs died in the houses, in the courtyards, in the fields. They were piled into heaps, and the land reeked of them. But when Pharaoh saw that there was relief, he hardened his heart and would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said. So this this confrontation is with the goddess Heket, who in Egyptian mythology actually has a frog head. And she is the goddess of fertility, of water, of renewal. And if you build upon the Nile, it is dead. It's full of blood. Frogs are amphibious. They would have tried to escape out of there if the water itself was bad. So, there's a reason they could want to come to the land and away from the Nile. And so they're everywhere, frogs everywhere. And the magicians, again, able to replicate, but not to solve. And one of the key things in this plague is we see that Moses gives Pharaoh the opportunity to name the time to remove the frogs, to solve the frog problem. And Pharaoh says tomorrow. And so the next day, all the frogs are dead. The frogs don't leave, they die, which leads to another problem, because anytime you have decomposing animals in heaps, it's going to attract bugs, and many bugs. And so there are some naturalistic things that are happening. Dead frogs will lead to bugs, which is the next plague. But the timeline of when these things happen is significant. They raise the staff, the frogs show up, they tell the frog, they cry out to God to kill the frogs tomorrow. The frogs are dead. The magicians cannot match this kind of authority over these things, but Moses and Aaron are displaying God's power here. Verse 16, in the next plague, the plague of gnats. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell Aaron, stretch out your staff and strike the dust of the ground and throughout the land of Egypt. The dust will become gnats." They did this, and when Aaron stretched out his hand and the staff and struck the dust of the ground, gnats came on people and animals. All the dust throughout the land of Egypt became gnats. But when the magicians tried to produce gnats by their secret arts, they could not. Since the gnats were on people and animals everywhere, the magicians said to Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." But Pharaoh's heart was hard, and he would not listen, just as the Lord had said. So Um, when we see the word for gnats here, most people are thinking like mosquitoes or or a tick of some sort. So we're not entirely sure what kind of bug this is, but the frogs could have attracted them, and now there's a ton, and there's so many, and it's coordinated with Aaron striking the dust. And if you could imagine, like, just the way the scripture talks about it is that the dust of all of Egypt turns into gnats, and like, ugh, it's so gross, because bugs are gross, and they're everywhere. And here, this is the first one. The magicians are like, we can't do this, and they say this is the finger of God. This is the power and authority of God doing these things. And an interesting theme to study throughout scripture as well is the finger of God. It is often associated with judgment from God to into sinful empires. And in particular, you look at the book of Daniel, and there Belshazzar is throwing this big, huge party in honor of himself, and he's using the elements from the temple that are like sacred elements for that. Belshazzar is just getting wasted with them, and so a finger appears and writes on the wall, "Mene, mene, tekel," another word that I'm not entirely sure what it is off the top of my head, but it basically says, "You have been weighed and found wanting," and it is a judgment written by the finger of God. When we get to Jesus and his ministry, he drives out, in the Gospel of Luke, talks about how he drives out the dark spirits by the finger of God. And like, this is a sign of God's authority and power, that he can do this with just his finger. And the magicians are recognizing that they do not compare to the power of Yahweh at this point. They can turn some water into a red colored substance. Sure, they can make some frogs appear. They can even make a serpent from their staff. Like, they can do these things, but now they're getting into the land into the realm that they have no authority, but God does. And so now we're going to have some more bugs here in the next plague, verse 20. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Get up early in the morning and confront Pharaoh as he goes to the river, and say to him, 'This is what the Lord says: Let my people go, so that they may worship me. If you do not let my people go, I will send swarms of flies on you and your officials, on your people, and into your houses. The houses of the Egyptians will be full of flies. Even the ground will be covered with them. But on that day, I will deal differently with the land of Goshen, where my people live. No swarms of flies will be there, so that you will know that I, the Lord, am in this land. I will make a distinction between my people and your people. The sign will occur tomorrow.' And the Lord did this. Dense swarms of flies poured into Pharaoh's palace and into the houses of his officials. Throughout Egypt, the land was ruined by the flies. Then Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, 'Go, sacrifice to your God here in the land.' But Moses said, 'That would not be right. The sacrifices we offer the Lord, our God, would be detestable to the Egyptians. And if we offer sacrifices that are detestable to their eyes, will they not stone us? We must take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God, as he commands us.' Pharaoh said, 'I will let you go to offer sacrifices to the Lord your God in the wilderness, but you must not go very far. Now pray for me.' Moses answered, 'As soon as I leave you, I will pray to the Lord, and tomorrow the flies will leave Pharaoh and his officials and his people. Only let Pharaoh be sure that he does not act deceitfully again by not letting the people go to offer sacrifices to the Lord.' Then Moses left Pharaoh and prayed to the Lord, and the Lord did what Moses asked. The flies left Pharaoh and his officials and his people. Not a fly remained. But this time also Pharaoh hardened his heart and would not let the people go." So this swarm of flies is, we might think like the common house fly, but really the way the Hebrew is talking is a mixture of all kinds of bugs. And there are many, many, many flying gross bugs all over the place. And so this is also the first plague that doesn't affect the people of Israel who are living in Goshen. And the Lord is making an intentional distinction. Like, you can't really tell a fly what to do or where to go. Like, I can't. I don't know about you. I can barely even like swat a fly. They're so fast and they move around, and it's frustrating. And so the idea that God could tell Pharaoh, there's going to be all these flies in the land. Yeah, the land has been experiencing all of this terrible stuff. There's a lot of dead frogs, a lot of gnats, and there's a lot of flies. They're only going to be in Egypt and not with my people, because I want you to see my power over even the smallest elements of creation. And so as this is going on, Pharaoh finally says, well, I'll let you make the sacrifices. Like that, that's fine. But Moses, his point that he counters with is the things that we are going to do in our sacrifices, the Egyptians aren't going to like. And particularly, like, they're going to sacrifice probably cows and sheep, which are also associated with the divinity or the idols of Egypt. And so they don't want to be seen as attacking the gods of the Egyptians, because the Egyptians will rebel against them. And so that's what he means when he's saying what we're going to do is detestable in their sights. We have to go. Let us leave the land so that we don't bring offense to you. And again, Pharaoh refuses. The Lord Moses prays, the flies go away, and Pharaoh says, nah, that's not going to work. I'm going to go back on my word here. So Pharaoh is just not a good dude at all. He's the worst. But there are more plagues that come in. And I kind of wonder at this point, did Moses think, wow, it might actually happen. We might actually be able to leave. This is good, only to have it be taken back, and they can't leave. So in verse 9:1, we have the plague on the livestock. Then the Lord said to Moses, go to Pharaoh and say to him, this is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says, let my people go, so that they may worship me. If you refuse to let them go and continue to hold them back, the hand of the Lord will bring a terrible plague on your livestock in the field, on your horses, donkeys, and camels, and on your cattle, sheep, and goats. But the Lord will make a distinction between the livestock of Israel and that of Egypt, so that no animal belonging to the Israelites will die. The Lord set a time and said, tomorrow the Lord will do this in the land. And the next day the Lord did it. All the livestock of the Egyptians died, but not one animal belonging to the Israelites died. Pharaoh investigated and found that not even one of the animals of the Israelites had died. Yet his heart was unyielding, and he would not let the people go. So here is a confrontation with the goddess of Hathor, who is the goddess of love and protection. And so the Lord attacks brings a plague on the livestock. And Hathor is depicted with the head of a cow in the imagery of the hieroglyphics and that kind of stuff. And so here the livestock are dead for the Egyptians, but not the Israelites. And Pharaoh even does the research. They send somebody to Goshen and to see, did this really happen the way that they said? And it all happened this way. And so one of the things that they say could have caused this is some kind of anthrax that affected all of the flock. That's the naturalistic way to approach this. But even if it was anthrax, to spread that quickly through the whole flock or all of the livestock in one day, that would require a divine act. That would require something more than just natural disease spread. And even, we're all amateur epidemiologists now. We have seen a lot of disease talk over the last year. it takes a long time for some diseases to spread, but as soon as they start, then they can get out of control real fast. And so here they have seen the Egyptians' livestock kind of just wiped out. And when something to keep in mind is the Egyptians were uh, not as focused on livestock and care for flocks and herds and that kind of stuff as the Israelites. So we don't know how many, how much this would have affected their economy. They were very, agrarian and a lot of crops, wheat and that kind of stuff. And so they had animals, but the difference between the Egyptians and the Israelites and their animals was pretty severe. The Israelites were shepherds. Even when they came down to Egypt, they said, "We're shepherds and give us Goshen so we can be away from you and you won't be offended by us." So this separation is now coming into another benefit for the people of Israel. So let's keep going. Verse 8. Then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Take handfuls of soot from a furnace and have Moses toss it into the air in the presence of Pharaoh. It will become fine dust over the whole land of Egypt, and festering boils will break out on people and animals throughout the land." So they took soot from the furnace and stood before Pharaoh. Moses tossed it into the air, and festering boils broke out on the people and animals. The magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils that were on them and on all the Egyptians. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said to Moses. And this is a confrontation with the goddess Isis, who is the Egyptian goddess of medicine and peace. And so we see this direct confrontation. And the way that this happened, like the furnace, the soot in the furnace could have been from the crematorium area for all of the animals that had died and that they were burning. And so if they have anthrax, then that could have created a disease that as these throws it up in the air, like starts to spread. But even, if you just throw dirt in the air, it's not going to go as far as the whole land of Egypt. And so again, even if there's a naturalistic reason for these things to happen, the spread of the event is the finger of God working in all of this. And there's a tiny little bit of humor in this account because of the way it talks about the magicians. They couldn't even come to see Moses and confront him because of the boils that they were dealing with. And they were probably in a good amount of pain and discomfort, and the Lord had sidelined the magicians from this confrontation as well. So so again, Pharaoh sees this, people are in pain, and Pharaoh hardens his heart, just as the Lord had said to Moses. So verse 13, the plague of hail. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Get up early in the morning, confront Pharaoh, and say to him, 'This is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews says. Let my people go, so that they may worship me. Or this time I will send the full force of my plagues against you and against your officials and your people, so you may know that there is no one like me in all the earth. For by now I could have stretched out my hand and struck you and your people with a plague that would have wiped you off the earth. But I have raised you up for this very purpose, that I might show you my power and that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. You still set yourself against my people and will not let them go. Therefore, at this time tomorrow, I will send the worst hailstorm that has ever fallen on Egypt from the day it was founded till now. Give an order now to bring your livestock and everything you have in the field to a place of shelter, because the hail will fall on every person and animal that has not been brought in and still out in the field, and they will die." One of the things, before going too far, the Lord's message to Pharaoh is direct in here, saying, "I am doing this so that I will be glorified in all the earth." Because Pharaoh Pharaoh himself thought he was divine, and that's why he could reject the gods of the people of the God of the people of Israel, because Pharaoh is God in Egypt, not Yahweh. And so the Lord is saying, I am going to elevate my name above your name, and you will not outlast me here. And so he's giving these direct messages to Pharaoh, and he's also saying, I have been withholding my power, and now I'm going to start pouring out my power. The hail that's going to come is something that there is no way the magicians could ever replicate. It's coming from the heavens itself. There's no way they could make this happen. But it's not just that hail is going to happen. It's going to be hail that is so big that if it hits you, you'll die. The animals will die. Like, this is the threat that's coming. Those officials of Pharaoh who feared the word of the Lord hurried to bring their slaves and their livestock inside, but those who ignored the word of the Lord left their slaves and livestock in the field. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand toward the sky so that the hail will fall all over Egypt, on people and animals, on everything growing in the fields of Egypt. When Moses stretched out his staff toward the sky, the Lord sent thunder and hail, and lightning flashed down to the ground. So the Lord rained hail on the land of Egypt. Hail fell and lightning flashed back and forth. It was the worst storm in all the land of Egypt since it had become a nation. Throughout Egypt, hail struck everything in the fields, both people and animals. It beat down everything growing in the fields and stripped every tree. The only place it did not hail was the land of Goshen, where the Israelites were. Then Pharaoh summoned Moses and said, this time I have sinned. He said to them, the Lord is in the right, and I and my people are in the wrong. Pray to the Lord, for we have had enough thunder and hail. I will let you go. You don't have to stay any longer. Moses replied, when I have gone out of the city, I will spread out my hand in prayer to the Lord. The thunder will stop, and there will be no more hail. So you may know that the earth is the Lord's. But I know that you and your officials still do not fear the Lord God. The flax and barley were destroyed, since the barley had headed and the flax was in bloom. The wheat and spelt, however, were not destroyed, because they ripened later. Then Moses left Pharaoh and went out of the city. He spread out his hands toward the Lord. The thunder and the hail stopped. The rain no longer poured down on the land. When Pharaoh saw that the rain and hail and thunder had stopped, he sinned again. He and his officials hardened their hearts. So Pharaoh's heart was hard, and he would not let the Israelites go, just as the Lord had said through Moses. Now, I know, I mean, we get pretty interesting hail here sometimes, where it's like, where did this come from? Like, it's never like anything close to what they're going through, but the moments when like it's July and it looks like it's snowed because of the hail, like that's a surprising situation. And so here, for the hail to be so big that it would kill you, this is something that no Egyptian had ever seen before, is what the Lord is saying, and it's happening. And one of the things that I find very interesting is they send messengers for Moses to come to Pharaoh. Like, people are dying because they're outside, and Pharaoh is still sending his people out, risking it. And I wonder if, as Moses is coming to see Pharaoh, if there was like the reverse of the rain cloud over your head cartoon. Like, it was just like wherever Moses went, like no rain. He didn't have any worries at all, because he was part of God's chosen people. There's no evidence in the text for that, but it would be an interesting image. And again, the only place where there was no hail was in Goshen, where the people of Israel are. God is clearly making a distinction. These are my chosen people. Egypt, you as a nation have sinned. And when Pharaoh repents, he says, I've sinned. This is awful. Please, we've had enough hail and thunder. And Moses prays, but Pharaoh still keeps his hard heart. And so the flax and the barley were ruined, which flax and barley come to harvest earlier. And so those are gone. and that's a major part of the Egyptian economy. But God's not done yet, because in chapter 10, we see the plague of the locust. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his officials, so that I may perform these signs of mine among them, that you may tell your children and grandchildren how I dealt harshly with the Egyptians and how I performed my signs among them, and that you may know that I am the Lord." Now, these stories that we are reading are meant to be retold to display God's power and authority. And God is even saying to Moses, like, I need you to remember to tell the story, to pass this on to the next generation. So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said to him, "This is what the Lord, the God of Hebrews, says. How long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go so they may worship me. If you refuse to let them go, I will bring locusts into your country tomorrow. They will cover the face of the ground so that it cannot be seen. They will devour what little you have left after the hail, including every tree that is growing in your fields. They will fill your houses and those of all your officials and all the Egyptians, something neither your parents nor your ancestors have ever seen from the day they settled in the land until now." Then Moses turned and left Pharaoh. Pharaoh's officials said to him, "How long will this man be a snare to us? Let the people go, so that they may worship the Lord their God. Do you not yet realize that Egypt is ruined?" Pharaoh's officials are starting to tell him that he has gone too far, that he needs to relent. Moses answered, then Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh. "Go, worship the Lord your God, but tell me who will be going." Moses answered, "We will go with our young and our old, with our sons and our daughters, with our flocks and herds, because we are to celebrate a festival to the Lord." Pharaoh said, "The Lord be with you. If I let you go along with your women and children, clearly you are bent on evil. No, have only the men go and worship the Lord, since that's what you have been asking for." Then Moses and Aaron were driven out of Pharaoh's presence. The Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hands over Egypt so that the locusts swarm over the land and devour everything growing in the fields, everything left by the hail." So Moses stretched out his staff over Egypt, and the Lord made an east wind blow across the land, and all that day and all that night. By morning, the wind had brought the locusts. They invaded all Egypt and settled down in every area of the country in great numbers. Never before had there been such a plague of locusts, nor will there ever be again. They covered all the ground until it was black. They devoured all that was left after the hail, everything growing in the fields and from the fruit on the trees. Nothing green remained on tree or plant in all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh quickly summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "I have sinned against the Lord your God and against you. Now forgive my sin once more and pray to the Lord your God to take this deadly plague away from me." Moses then left Pharaoh and prayed to the Lord, and the Lord changed the wind to a very strong west wind, which cut up the locusts and carried them into the Red Sea. Not a locust was left anywhere in Egypt, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let the Israelites go. So here Moses and Aaron say that this this locust plague that's coming is going to be the worst they've ever seen. And, this threat is enough that the officials are turning against Pharaoh. But Pharaoh's questions to Moses are like, well, who's going to worship with you? And he wants them to only take the men. But no, and he says, you've only been asking for the men. But as you read through, remember, like, it doesn't say anywhere in here that Moses was only asking to take the men to go and worship the Lord. And this is one of the key distinctions in Israelite worship, is that it is a family event. It is meant for the people to worship together. It was, there is a male priesthood, yes, but in every household, every member of the household was supposed to worship the Lord together. And so even here, Pharaoh is refusing to let all the people go, because he's working in a paradigm where only the men go and worship in the temple. Why would the women and children need to go? And so Moses says, no, that's not going to work for us. And so they get driven out, and then the Lord drives the locusts in. And so this east wind is coming from the east to the west, driving up the locusts overnight. They eat everything, destroy everything. The economy of Egypt is ruined. And the next day, the Lord, or they finally Pharaoh calls Moses and Aaron in, and they pray. And the next day, the west wind blows all the locusts away. Again, yes, locusts are a real problem in the ancient world, and they're out of control. Like, people cannot just predict when locusts are coming or what they're going to do. They have a mind of their own. And so here the Lord is showing that even the Lord even has control over the wind and over the locusts, and He is destroying the whole economy of Egypt. And Pharaoh repents and then turns against that repentance again. The Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let the Israelites go. And the locust is really just a really big grasshopper that's grown, like it's grown like to fruition in just the right situation where they are stronger than like a one grasshopper, and there's nothing that is natural predators like to eat them and they're young, and so they just multiply. And so these swarms of locusts are a real concern. And one time I was driving, my friend Brian and Kathy, my wife now, we were dating then, we were driving in Eastern Washington, and in a wheat field area, and there was a swarm of grasshoppers like I had never seen before. And it was the craziest thing. And we had to have the windshield wipers going and trying to clear our windshield through it all. Like, it was insane. And for that level of inconvenience and grossness, here, like, the ground is covered with locusts. The ground is black with them. Like, you can't even see the ground because of all the bugs all over the place. And like, this is the level of control that God has. This would be terrifying, but God's not done, because there are still 2 more plagues. The last one we're going to look at tonight is the plague of darkness in verse 21. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand toward the sky so that darkness spreads over Egypt, darkness that can be felt." So Moses stretched out his hand toward the sky, and total darkness covered all Egypt for 3 days. No one could see anyone else or move about for 3 days. All the Israelites had light in the places where they lived. Then Pharaoh summoned Moses and said, "Go worship the Lord. Even your women and children may go with you. Only leave your flocks and herds behind." But Moses said, You must allow us to have the sacrifice and burnt offerings to present to the Lord our God. Our livestock too must go with us. Not a hoof is to be left behind. We have to use some of them in worshiping the Lord our God. And until we get there, we will not know what we are to use to worship the Lord. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he was not willing to let them go. Pharaoh said to Moses, "Get out of my sight. Make sure you do not appear before me again. The day you see my face, you will die." "Just as you say," Moses replied, "I will never appear before you again." This darkness that can be felt. The darkest place I've ever been, where there's no electricity, and just at nighttime is just stars. And it was up on off of Vancouver Island, on a little place called Copper Island. And some of you may have been there before. I was there all by myself. Don, my father-in-law, was selling his boat to the camp that's there, and he was teaching the one of the camp directors how to use the boat so that they could train people to to fish as like a charter fisherman so that the kids who are these First Nation kids could build a trade to be charter fishermen. Great idea. And Don said, you should come see it. And you've never been to the camp. And so see what we're doing up there. And so I'm going to leave for a couple days and then I'll come back. And so I was like, absolutely. But I was by myself and it was very dark at night. And I've never been anywhere that isolated and that dark. And like, that is just the natural darkness. Here in this passage, a darkness that is so thick that it can be felt. And so it's not just like nighttime darkness. Something is blocking out the sun. And it could be like a very, very intense sandstorm that would overtake the sun. But like if you can feel it, there's like something in the air that you can feel. You know, it's kind of like the wildfires that we've had the last several summers, where like the sky turns orange and all of the light is dark, and like even going outside, it's hard to breathe. Like that's the starting point of what's going on in this kind of plague, where everything is terrible outside. And so it's bad and terrifying, and people can't move and they're afraid. And so Pharaoh relents here and says, you can go, women and children, old and young, just leave all your animals. Why would Pharaoh want him to leave the animals? Because all of Egypt's animals are dead. And so he's trying to take them and to be able to have something after all of these confrontations with the Lord. And Moses says, no, we need to take them all. We don't know what God is going to ask of us when we sacrifice. And so he refuses to leave the flock. And Pharaoh says, no, forget it then, and never come before me again. And Moses says, yes, I will never come. I will never appear before you again, which is curious because Moses and Pharaoh at this point, they can't know what is next. They don't know what the 10th plague is going to be. Moses was told and hinted that it was going to strike Pharaoh's firstborn, but he doesn't know the extent to what's going to happen. And my little theory here that I haven't found anybody who's like, yes, that's it. I think is Moses says, I will never appear before you again. And it could be that Moses never appears before this Pharaoh again because he was the firstborn and he could be dead after the plague of the firstborn. And so this whole confrontation between the Lord and Pharaoh and the gods of Egypt, God shows again and again and again that he is more powerful than the false gods of Egypt, and that the people of Israel are distinct from the people of Egypt. He protects them from the worst of these plagues. And going all the way back to when they came into the land of Egypt, they were protected by God's sovereignty, leading them out of the famine in Canaan to Egypt. God is directing their steps to this moment. And there was an Israelite who created a plan to save Egypt from the 7 years of famine. And all the nations were buying food from Egypt. It was an Israelite who made that possible. And now the Israelites are surviving through this season of plagues, which was probably about 6 months of time, 6 to 9 months of time that passed between all the plagues. And God is again showing his sovereignty and power in Egypt as he's leading his people out and taking them home as he promised he would to Abraham. All the way back when God was speaking to Abraham, he said, your people will be wanderers. They'll be in Egypt for 400 years. He confirmed that with Jacob, that before Jacob finally took his family to the land of Egypt, the Lord said, they will be there for about 400 years, and then I will bring them back. And now it's all coming to pass. And it is a display of God's power and sovereignty over all of the natural order of the world and over all the gods of Egypt. So next week we'll look at the plague on the firstborn, and so a lot of stuff we went over, a lot of plagues. Any questions or thoughts from what we discussed today that stood out to you?
Do you think the Hebrew people were sharing or selling their livestock or food or whatever to the Egyptians?
That's a really good question, because there's, as you look at the plagues after the livestock are killed, or the plague on the livestock, right? The next one is hail, and the Lord tells them, bring all your livestock inside or else they're going to die. So it was like, but I thought they were dead. So somehow they may have bought some from somebody. Yeah. So, because the timeline, let me see here. The timeline, I can't remember if it says exactly how many days are between those. All right, let the people go. Then the Lord said to Moses. So it doesn't really say how long between the plague on the livestock and the plague of boils and the plague of hail. Yeah, it doesn't say how much time is in between there, but it, we have them like day, like it, like verse after verse after verse, and there could be weeks between these, between some of these, and so the Egyptians could have been trying to rebuild, acquire livestock, because like we need to get out of this eventually, and livestock are going to make that possible. So yeah, I don't think they would have just given them livestock, because that was wealth, and so the Egyptians were probably needing to buy it from them, or from another country like Ethiopia or Sudan. Like there's other countries around that could have also had livestock. So, and when we think about country,
even though they were slaves, they were allowed to own their own livestock and possessions and stuff like that.
Yeah, because the people of Israel were separate or separated from the people of Egypt. They lived in Goshen, which was a region just to the side, essentially, of Cairo and the Nile. So their home base was over here. And so however they became slaves, we're not totally sure, but they had to still care for themselves in some way. And so they had property, they had things, they just weren't allowed to leave Egypt. And they were forced to work making bricks and that kind of stuff. So yeah, so the dynamic of slavery, the slavery dynamics are a lot different than I think what we would assume, just based on our own country's history with slavery. It's just a different system than what we talk about in American history. So, but the other thing too, when we think about country of Egypt, like we have this map in our mind that is like Northeast Africa, that big, huge chunk of land is Egypt. But the country of Egypt grew and contracted over time. And so they're like, the idea of the country of Egypt being this huge chunk of land, like we might not be thinking the same way as Moses and the Israelites would have considered Egypt. So Egypt could have had a country a little farther down the river that was selling upriver, that wasn't being affected by the plagues. So they didn't just have to buy it from the Israelites; they could have gotten it from other people too.
Well, and that's also part of the promise that God made to Moses at the burning bush. He said, "You will plunder the Egyptians," and that's probably another way that could have been accomplished, is selling the goods that they still had preserved from what the Egyptians were devastated.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, there's a great reversal happening in the fortunes of the Israelites over the Egyptians. So even when they leave, like they're taking the gold, and like the Egyptians are offering the gold, like, please take this,
Go.
you know. So
Yeah.
go on, get. So yeah, so it is a great reversal in the story, and the Bible is full of great reversals where like what would normally happen doesn't happen, where the oppressed become the victors. And like that is the story throughout scripture over and over again. And even in my Bible reading, like devotional reading, I'm in the book of Judges right now. And the book of Judges is fascinating because it's that once again, the people of Israel had no king in the land, and everyone did whatever they saw fit in their own eyes, right? That's the theme. And that leads to sin, and then that leads to oppression, and then they cry out to God, and God delivers them by raising up a leader who's filled with the Spirit of God. And that reversal is a common theme throughout the book of Judges, and in the history of the people of Israel. The Assyrians will come and try to take Jerusalem. They took the northern kingdom. They tried to take Jerusalem, and Jerusalem is like sieged in, and there's no hope. And then some lepers go out into the Assyrians' camp and find that overnight the angel of the Lord had wiped out all of the Assyrians. And so, like, this is not how things normally go, but
Yeah.
this is how God displays his power. So, yeah, the Old Testament is cool. It's got so many cool, fun, just bizarre stories. And these plagues are some of those bizarre stories too. So, yeah. Any other questions or thoughts?
I have a question. I have a thought. It's just
Mhm.
interesting how this thing strung on for so long. I mean, because I was looking at it and I thought, why doesn't, why do not Moses and Aaron tell Pharaoh, you let my people go first, when they're good and gone, we'll take the plagues off you. Make my people get out of there first. Once they're free and clear, we'll take this plague off of you. But it strings on and on and on. And you wonder, is it trying to make Pharaoh more and more mad? Because when you get mad, you get angry and you mess up.
Right.
Well, but
yeah.
it's all for God's glory. But it could have been, I'm sitting here going, I'm a person of let's get this done. And it's like, this whole thing could have been circumvented, but no, not really.
Yeah. So we always have our plan, and our preference is like, if we were negotiating with Pharaoh, this is what I would do, right? But God sees the end from the beginning, and he already knows, like, I'm going to defeat Egypt. Like, that's God's purpose in this whole, and all of these stories. Like, I am going to defeat Egypt, and I'm going to cement my power in the minds and the hearts of the people of Israel. Like, they're going to know what I'm going to do. They're going to see it. They're going to experience his protection while people just a few miles over are going through these plagues. And so while like our thought is, I would love to be able to just like make this happen for you real quick. So let me just do this. And when we're, in Sinai, then I'll say, God, take those plagues away. But that's not God's plan. God's plan is like, I want to confront the deities of the people of Egypt. I want to confront Pharaoh, and I want to completely destroy their power over the Israelites. So, yeah. So it's a different plan than what we would do.
Didn't after that, some of the Egyptians went with them, right?
I do believe that some people went, but I don't think it wasn't like a massive amount. But there were people who recognized that the Lord is the ultimate authority, and they were converting into the covenant people. So, because remember, the promise to Abraham is that through his descendants all nations will be blessed. Right. And so even though the people of Israel are distinct, there are pathways into the covenant people that are going to be spelled out in the law. Like, how do you become a Jewish person? Like, that is a process of conversion is available. And that is ultimately the goal for the people, is like, come be a part of God's covenant family. So like, they're not going to turn Egyptians who are willing to become Jewish away. So
The other thing I had a question on, not question on too, is makes no mention in here of how the Egyptians were handling this. I mean, it shows what happened to their belongings or animal livestock, but no mention of, them going questioning Pharaoh, going, what is going on? Do you think this was not a well publicized event when Moses is going to Pharaoh? It was just a quiet little thing. The whole town, the whole Egypt did not know about it.
Well, I mean, it was affecting everybody. So
Yeah.
I think there's a term called gaslighting. Have you guys heard of this?
Mm-hmm.
Where
my daughter
you
told me
are
about that today. I
I took
think
4 years of it. Sorry.
well, I don't have to get into that. But gaslighting is essentially when, like, it's from a movie called The Gaslight, and a husband is trying to convince his wife that she's crazy by like adjusting the light. In, like, one of the ways is by adjusting the amount of light that is coming from the gaslight. And it's like, no, it was never that bright. Like, trying to convince her that she is remembering wrong. That's not the, and so that's where this comes from. So potentially Pharaoh could be saying like, oh no, that didn't really happen. And like, there could be a gaslighting operation going on. But when Pharaoh's officials come to him in one of these and says, you cannot keep this going, you've got to let them go, Pharaoh then is just out there on his own. Like, his officials are turning against him. So yeah, I don't know how publicized Pharaoh's messages. Like, he wasn't, they didn't have media the way we do now, but yeah, people saw it. Their animals died, their crops were destroyed. Like, it was not just a small thing. So
I just like it how God methodically wipes out their economy inch by inch by inch.
Yeah, God's not messing around.
Yeah.
So he knows what he's up to. So yeah. All right. Well, my kids are hanging out outside my window here from my office, so I should probably go.
Thanks, Jason.
All right. Thank you, guys. It was next week we'll start up with a real bummer. So just heads up, it's going to be sad. So but they'll get out of Egypt. So all right. So I'll see y'all later.
Right. Have a